Chosen ones. Someone is watching your social media right now with trembling hands. Their heart is racing. Their stomach is twisted in knots. And it's not because they miss you. It's because they're finally seeing what everyone else is starting to see. The lies they told about you are crumbling. The narrative they built is collapsing. And the worst part for them? You're thriving. You're glowing. You're becoming everything they swore you would never be. While they scrambled to paint you as broken, unstable, and toxic, you were quietly transforming into someone they could never compete with. The cosmic joke writes itself. They tried to destroy your reputation, but they accidentally handed you the blueprint for your greatest evolution. Every word they twisted became a mirror reflecting their own shadow. Every story they spun revealed more about their chaos than yours. They thought they were burying you 6 feet under. Instead, they planted seeds in soil so rich that what grew back made their fiction look like cheap theater. And now the audience is walking out. This isn't about revenge. This is about revelation. There's something about your energy that makes people who live in masks uncomfortable. You don't even have to speak. Your presence alone forces people to confront what they've been avoiding their entire lives, the weight of their own inauthenticity. When someone carrying truth walks into a room full of performers, the performance gets exhausting. The masks feel heavier. The act starts cracking under pressure. They sensed this shift before you even fully stepped into your power. On some primal level, they knew your awakening would expose their spiritual bankruptcy. So they struck first. They launched a preemptive attack disguised as concern, as truth-telling, as protecting others. Desperate people do desperate things. They took everything ugly about themselves and pinned it on you like evidence at a crime scene. But here's what they didn't calculate. Here's the variable they completely missed in their equation of destruction. You weren't who they thought you were. You were a chosen one in the cocoon stage. And their attacks, those became the pressure that forced your transformation. They called you disloyal while backstabbing behind closed doors. They labeled you controlling while pulling strings in every relationship. They accused you of attention-seeking while crying for validation in every conversation. This wasn't random drama. This was calculated psychological warfare. They were operating under the assumption that chosen ones respond to attacks the same way ordinary people do, with retaliation, with bitterness, with a desperate need to defend themselves. They expected you to fight fire with fire, to meet their public assassination attempts with equally dramatic counterattacks. They were banking on you descending to their level, engaging in the kind of spiritual mud wrestling that makes everyone involved look dirty. They had the whole script written. They knew exactly how the movie would end. You would crumble. You would lash out. You would prove their narrative correct through your own desperate reactions. But you didn't take the bait. You did something that completely destroyed their strategy. You did something that would later reveal itself as the most powerful move you could have made. You went silent. Not the silence of defeat. Not the silence of someone too broken to speak. This was the silence of someone who found something more powerful than words. This was the silence of a warrior entering the chamber of transformation. While they created chaos externally, you turned inward. You began the most dangerous work a chosen one can do. You started healing for real, not the surface-level healing that looks good on social media. The deep cellular soul-level reconstruction that happens when you decide to use your pain as raw material for power. You transformed every wound into wisdom. Every betrayal became a lesson in discernment. Every moment of isolation became deeper connection with your divine nature. What they didn't anticipate was how your silence would amplify their noise. The more they talked, the louder they got, the more desperate they sounded. You became a black hole of strategic non-engagement, and their words kept circling the event horizon, getting distorted, losing energy, eventually collapsing under their own weight. This wasn't weakness. This was warfare at the highest level. You understood something profound that they never learned. Engaging with lies gives them energy, makes them seem worthy of debate, dignifies them with your attention. Instead, you let your life become the argument. Your transformation became the testimony. Your peace became the proof. And while they were busy performing for an audience, You were becoming someone the universe itself would defend. Because here's a law they forgot. Here's a principle written into the fabric of reality. Truth doesn't need defense lawyers. Truth doesn't require a PR team. Truth doesn't need you to argue its case in the court of public opinion. Truth just needs time. Time and your willingness to embody it so completely that reality itself rearranges around your authenticity. Something remarkable started happening in the spaces you used to occupy. The dynamics they blamed on you didn't disappear when you left. They intensified. The drama they said you caused kept erupting like clockwork. But now there was no convenient target, no scapegoat to absorb the blame. The uncomfortable truth began surfacing like bodies in a lake when the water level drops. Maybe the common denominator in all their relationship failures wasn't you. Maybe it was them. People started noticing patterns they'd been too distracted to see before. Without you there to focus on, without your presence to obsess over, they began observing the accuser more closely. They witnessed how conversations turned toxic the moment this person entered, how drama followed them from place to place, relationship to relationship, situation to situation like a shadow they couldn't shake. The spotlight that had been artificially directed at you through their careful manipulation began shifting naturally toward where it belonged. And under that light, things looked very different than the story they'd been selling. Meanwhile, you were experiencing a profound internal shift that would later become the foundation of your complete vindication. You weren't just healing from their attacks. You were evolving beyond their entire frequency. Think about that for a moment. While they were stuck in the same patterns, the same loops, the same destructive cycles, you were ascending through levels of consciousness they didn't even know existed. Every attempt to diminish you strengthened your spiritual immune system. Every lie became a catalyst for deeper self-reflection and authentic growth. They were pouring poison into soil, not knowing they were actually adding the exact nutrients needed for your metamorphosis. They gambled everything on your eventual breakdown. They bet their entire reputation on your collapse. They invested their social capital in the narrative that pressure would crack your foundation and prove them right. Time passed. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And you're still standing, not just surviving, thriving with a consistency that makes their accusations look hollow. Your relationships didn't crumble. They deepened with people who could see through the fog. Your work didn't fall apart. It flourished as you channeled pain into purpose. Your health didn't deteriorate. It improved as you released the toxic weight of their presence. You began displaying qualities that directly contradicted every aspect of their character assassination. Where they claimed instability, you demonstrated unwavering equilibrium. Where they insisted you were toxic, you radiated health and vitality that people could feel from across rooms. Where they painted you as manipulative, you showed transparent authenticity that made others feel safe enough to drop their own masks. The contrast became so stark that maintaining their narrative required mental gymnastics from anyone still believing it. People who initially believed their stories started experiencing cognitive dissonance, the painful psychological state when your direct observations contradict information you've accepted as true. They would see you at gatherings calm and centered, and wonder how someone described as volatile could carry such peaceful energy. They would witness your interactions with others kind, respectful, genuinely caring, and struggle to reconcile that with the manipulative person they'd been told about. They would watch you handle conflict with grace and maturity, and question whether the unstable narrative ever made sense. The gap between their direct experience and the story they'd been fed grew wider with each encounter. And cognitive dissonance, when it reaches a certain threshold, demands resolution. The mind cannot hold contradictory beliefs indefinitely. Something has to give. Either their direct observations were wrong, or the story was wrong. And direct observation, when consistent over time, always wins. Your accuser found themselves working harder and harder to maintain credibility. What had once been effortless character assassination now required elaborate explanations for why reality didn't match their descriptions. They had to create increasingly complex justifications for why someone they'd painted as destructive appeared to be thriving in every measurable way. They had to invent new narratives to explain away the obvious transformation people could see with their own eyes. But each new explanation required more suspension of disbelief. Each additional justification stretched plausibility thinner. They were building a house of cards in a windstorm, and they could feel it starting to sway. But the real panic set in when your transformation became undeniable, when your spiritual growth reached a point where it couldn't be hidden, dismissed, or explained away, when your energy shifted so dramatically that even casual observers could sense something profound had changed. This wasn't just someone who recovered from drama. This was someone fundamentally transformed by their trials, someone who used opposition as fuel for evolution, someone who took the worst thing that ever happened to them and alchemized it into the best thing that ever happened to them. If this message hits your spirit, hype this video so more chosen ones like you can find it. The transformation wasn't subtle. Your energy signature altered completely. Where there once might have been reactivity, there was now responsive wisdom. Where there might have been defensiveness, there was now grounded confidence that needed no defense. Where there might have been bitterness, there was now genuine peace that confused people because it seemed impossible given what you'd been through. This wasn't performed for show. It wasn't a mask or a persona. It was authentic change radiating from your being like light from a star. And here's where their panic really started to set in. Here's where the trembling began. Because transformation of this magnitude doesn't happen to people who are what they claimed you were. Toxic people don't emerge from isolation more peaceful. Manipulative people don't come back more authentic. Unstable people don't return more grounded. Your transformation was living proof that their entire narrative was built on lies. Human beings are wired for pattern recognition. It's how we survived as a species, and sooner or later curiosity overrides indoctrination. The quiet observers in the background, the ones who never said much but noticed everything, began comparing notes. They watched how you carried yourself, how you didn't retaliate, even when you had every right to, how you kept moving forward with grace, while your accusers remained stuck in destructive patterns like flies trapped in amber. They watched how you spoke about your experience when asked. No venom, no bitterness, just clarity and boundaries. They watched how you rebuilt your life without needing to tear anyone else down. And they started asking questions, first to themselves, then to each other, then eventually to the accuser directly. Your former accusers found themselves in an impossible position. They could continue insisting you were unstable while you radiated stability. They could keep claiming toxicity while you demonstrated health in ways that made others feel healthier, just being around you. They could maintain you were manipulative while you showed authentic vulnerability and genuine care that couldn't be faked over extended periods. With each passing day, their position became more untenable, their stories more obviously false, their credibility more damaged by insistence on defending the indefensible. They were standing in quicksand, and every movement to save themselves pulled them deeper. The whispers started small. Friends questioning inconsistencies in stories they'd heard months ago. Colleagues noting the stark contrast between reputation and reality. Family members wondering if they'd been fed incomplete information or outright lies. These weren't dramatic confrontations, just quiet moments of private doubt that accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. What your accuser hadn't counted on was the power of collective observation. While they could control the initial narrative through emotional manipulation and strategic storytelling, while they could influence early opinions through carefully crafted presentations of events, they couldn't control what people saw with their own eyes over extended periods. They couldn't manipulate reality itself. The human mind is remarkably good at pattern recognition when given enough data points, and patterns of authenticity versus patterns of deception become obvious when observed consistently over time. It's like watching two different movies playing on the same screen. Eventually you can tell which one is real and which one is projection. The most perceptive observers began noticing something even more telling than your positive transformation. They began recognizing the signs of deception in your accuser. They saw how stories changed slightly with each telling, how details shifted and morphed depending on the audience, how certain events became more dramatic over time, inflating like balloons until they bore little resemblance to what actually happened. They witnessed the exhausting effort required to maintain false narratives, the constant vigilance needed to keep track of which version of the story they'd told to whom, the emotional manipulation deployed whenever someone asked clarifying questions, the defensive reactions that seemed disproportionate to simple inquiries, the increasing desperation that comes when lies start unraveling and there's no way to stop the process. During this period, you were undergoing what could only be described as a spiritual initiation. The trials you faced weren't random misfortunes or bad luck. They were precisely calibrated challenges designed to activate dormant aspects of your consciousness, tests specifically designed for chosen ones. Every attack on your character became an opportunity to clarify your values and decide who you really were beneath the opinions of others. Every moment of isolation became a chance to deepen connection with your authentic self and discover that you were never actually alone. This initiation process revealed gifts you didn't know you possessed. Your intuition sharpened to laser precision. You could feel lies now before people even finished speaking them. You could sense manipulation before it fully formed. Your ability to see through deception became almost supernatural. People would try the same tactics on you that might have worked before, and they'd bounce off your awareness like arrows off a shield. Your capacity for genuine compassion, even toward those who wounded you, expanded beyond what you thought possible. Not the fake forgiveness that spiritual people perform to look enlightened. Real compassion born from understanding that hurt people, and that their attacks on you were really attacks on themselves. You weren't just recovering from trauma. You were being forged into something stronger, wiser, and more spiritually powerful than you'd ever been. You were becoming the version of yourself that your future self had been calling you toward your entire life. Your evolution forced others to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. Your growth didn't come with loud announcements or dramatic speeches. It didn't need press releases or social media campaigns. It happened in silence, in private moments where no one was watching, in the daily choices you made to heal rather than harden, to grow rather than shrink, to love rather than hate. But now the results were undeniable. You walked into rooms with peace that couldn't be faked by even the best actors, a presence that spoke louder than any denial ever could, an energy that made people feel something they couldn't quite name but definitely recognized as real. You weren't trying to prove anything. You didn't need to. Your being had become the proof. Meanwhile, you were experiencing something your accusers couldn't have imagined in their worst nightmares. You were attracting the very things they claimed you would repel. Healthy relationships began forming around your authentic energy, like iron filings around a magnet. Not the surface-level connections based on shared trauma or mutual enemies. Deep, nourishing relationships with people who saw you clearly and chose you anyway. Opportunities opened up as people recognized your genuine character and wanted to be associated with your energy. Your reputation grew organically, built not on manufactured stories or strategic networking, but on consistent demonstration of who you really were. You weren't defending yourself against their lies. You were simply living in such a way that the lies defended themselves out of existence. Truth was proving itself through the laboratory of your actual lived experience. This organic growth of your reputation created a feedback loop that accelerated their panic. The more you thrived, the more obviously false their characterizations became. The more peaceful you appeared, the more chaotic their continued attacks looked. The more successful you became, the more their attempts to diminish you appeared motivated by jealousy rather than legitimate concern. They could see it happening. They could feel the narrative slipping through their fingers like sand, and there was nothing they could do to stop it without exposing themselves further. Every attempt to reassert their story only highlighted the gap between fiction and reality. Every time they brought up old accusations, people would look at current you and struggle to reconcile the two images. The dissonance was deafening. But perhaps most threatening to them was how your success began attracting attention from people outside their sphere of influence. New connections entered your life. Mentors who recognized your potential, collaborators who resonated with your energy, friends who had never heard the false narrative and therefore had no preconceptions to overcome. These people formed opinions about you based purely on direct interaction. Those opinions were universally positive. This created an expanding circle of advocates who could testify to your character from first-hand experience. People who had no reason to lie for you, no stake in defending you, simply sharing what they genuinely observed. Your accuser realized they were facing a nightmare scenario. Your reputation was growing beyond their ability to control or influence it. The lies they had carefully planted in local soil were being overshadowed by truth growing in gardens they couldn't access. Their smear campaign, which seemed so effective in contained environments, proved powerless against the organic spread of authentic relationships. The psychological pressure on them intensified as they watched you not just survive their attacks but transform them into stepping stones toward greater success and deeper wisdom. This violated their fundamental understanding of how the world works. In their mind, their lies should have destroyed you. Your reputation should have crumbled like a sandcastle in a tsunami. Your life should have fallen apart in spectacular fashion that validated their narrative and proved them right. The fact that the opposite occurred challenged their entire worldview. It forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of reality, justice, and spiritual law. The universe wasn't operating according to their script. Something deeper was at play, something they couldn't manipulate or control, and that terrified them more than anything. It became clear that you had receipts, not just physical evidence, but spiritual, emotional, and energetic documentation of everything that transpired. While your accusers moved on like nothing happened, assuming you'd be too broken to gather yourself together, assuming your silence meant defeat, you were quietly putting pieces together. You healed and remembered, not in a vengeful way, in a clear way. You weren't collecting ammunition for revenge. You were gathering clarity to prevent future gaslighting. You were documenting reality so thoroughly that no one could ever twist it beyond recognition again. Your very existence became proof they couldn't erase, proof that lived in your body, your energy, your transformation, proof that didn't need to be argued because it was self-evident to anyone with eyes to see. You didn't come back loud, you came back whole. That wholeness alone was threatening because it meant you had your voice, your strength, and your truth intact. You knew what happened, who did what, when, how, why. You had timelines they forgot you lived through, details they hoped you wouldn't remember, truths they hoped you'd be too shattered to ever speak, let alone live out loud. But you remembered everything, not with bitterness, with clarity. And clarity is far more dangerous to liars than anger ever could be. Anger can be dismissed as instability. Clarity cannot be dismissed at all. The cosmic irony reached its peak when the very people who had warned others about you started becoming the ones others warned each other about. The patterns of behavior they had projected onto you began manifesting more obviously in their own lives as the stress of maintaining false narratives took its toll. They found themselves increasingly isolated, not because of any campaign against them, not because you turned people against them, but because authentic people naturally distance themselves from those who traffic in deception. This isolation wasn't immediate or dramatic. It was gradual and organic. People simply began finding excuses to avoid interactions that left them feeling drained, confused, or manipulated. Invitations became less frequent, phone calls went unreturned, social circles naturally contracted as others unconsciously protected their own peace. The energy required to maintain lies is exhausting. That exhaustion becomes palpable to sensitive individuals. They could feel it emanating from the accuser like heat from a fire, and they stepped back, not with judgment, just with self-preservation. What made this isolation particularly painful was that it couldn't be blamed on any external force. There was no conspiracy against them, no coordinated campaign of exclusion, no villain to point at. People were simply responding to the energy they carried and the chaos that followed them like a storm cloud. The very outcomes they had tried to create for you through their lies were manifesting in their own experience through the natural operation of spiritual law. What you send out comes back. What you plant, you harvest. The universe is a mirror, not a portrait. They were experiencing the consequences of their own actions reflected back at them with perfect accuracy. The stress of maintaining false narratives began showing up in other areas of their life. Relationships became more difficult as the habit of deception bled into other interactions. Once you lie about one person, it becomes easier to lie about others. Once you manipulate one situation, manipulation becomes your default mode. Work performance suffered as emotional energy was diverted toward damage control and narrative management. How can you focus on productivity when you're constantly worried about which version of the story you told to whom? Health issues emerged as the body responded to chronic stress and internal conflict. The body keeps the score. The body doesn't lie. The body knows when you're living in integrity and when you're not, and it responds accordingly. The attack they had launched against you was boomeranging back with compound interest. Every ounce of negative energy they sent your direction was returning to them multiplied. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of their situation was the growing awareness that they had created their own prison. Every lie they told about you became a bar in the cage of their own making. Every false narrative became a chain binding them to a version of reality, increasingly difficult to maintain. They had become slaves to their own deception, trapped by stories they could neither abandon nor successfully defend. Their entire reputation was revealed to be built on making you the villain they actually were. Their popularity, their trustworthiness, even the sympathy they received was all constructed on painting you as the problem. They didn't need facts. They just needed enough drama, enough emotion, and the right crowd willing to believe a well-told story. You became the scapegoat they used to wash themselves clean, the convenient explanation for all their relationship failures, the reason their life wasn't working. If they could convince everyone that you were the problem, then they never had to look at themselves, never had to face their own demons, never had to do the uncomfortable work of genuine self-reflection. Your absence from their spaces didn't bring the peace they promised. Instead of harmony, things got messier. The same drama kept happening like a broken record. But now you weren't around to absorb the blame. Now there was no convenient target. The energy didn't lighten. It got heavier. The conversations didn't become more respectful. They became more manipulative as the accuser tried harder to control narratives without you there to scapegoat. The unity they guaranteed never materialized. And people began to notice that when you were gone but the conflict remained, the math stopped adding up. If you were really the problem, your absence should have solved it. The fact that it didn't raised questions that no amount of storytelling could answer. Your silence throughout this entire process wasn't passivity. It was strategy of the highest order. You understood something your accusers didn't. Truth doesn't need to be defended, because truth defends itself. Lies require constant maintenance, endless justification, and increasingly elaborate explanations to cover inconsistencies. Truth simply exists, patient and persistent, waiting for reality to reveal what was always there beneath the fabrications. During this period of strategic non-engagement, you were also developing what could be called spiritual immunity, the ability to remain centered and clear regardless of external chaos or attack. This immunity didn't come from building walls or shutting down emotionally. It came from developing such a strong connection to your own truth that external opinions lost their power to destabilize you. You knew who you were, not who they said you were, not who you hoped to be, who you actually were in the depths of your being. And that knowing became an anchor that no storm could dislodge. Your reputation outgrew their slander entirely. When they tried to bury you, they thought small, limiting their campaign to your immediate circle, assuming your influence ended where theirs did. They believed that poisoning a few wells would ensure no one would ever come to you for water again. But real purpose doesn't ask for permission. Truth doesn't stay confined to zip codes or social circles. Authentic power doesn't recognize the boundaries that small-minded people try to draw. While they were busy trashing your name in whispered conversations and group chats, you were evolving quietly and relentlessly. You didn't fight their campaign with retaliation. You responded with results. You got better, wiser, more focused, more powerful. As your growth continued, people from beyond their circles started to notice. People with wider vision, people they never considered, people whose opinions actually mattered in the grand scheme of things. people who could recognize authentic transformation when they saw it. Suddenly, the very name they tried to tarnish locally started being celebrated in spaces they could never access. Your work was being quoted in rooms they couldn't enter. Your story was inspiring people they'd never meet. Your influence had transcended from personal to universal. Now they were facing the humiliating reality that their lies only worked in small, controlled environments. The moment you stepped beyond those boundaries, the truth became obvious to everyone. As your spiritual evolution continued, something even more profound began to happen. You started to feel genuine compassion for the people who had tried to destroy you. Not fake forgiveness that comes from spiritual bypassing or pretending everything is fine when it's not. The deep understanding that comes from recognizing that hurt people hurt people. You could see that their attacks on you were really attacks on their own unrealized potential, their own abandoned dreams, their own rejected authentic selves. They saw in you what they could have been if they'd made different choices, and instead of using that as inspiration, they tried to destroy the mirror. This compassion arose from a place of genuine wisdom rather than weakness. You began to understand that their behavior toward you was never really about you. It was about their own internal battles with inadequacy, fear, and self-hatred. They had projected their shadow onto you because facing it within themselves felt impossible. In attacking you, they were trying to destroy the parts of themselves they couldn't accept or integrate. Your light reminded them of their darkness. Your growth reminded them of their stagnation. Your authenticity reminded them of their masks. And rather than using that discomfort as a catalyst for their own transformation, they tried to dim your light so they could stay comfortable in their darkness. Your compassion also extended to those who had initially believed the false narratives about you. You recognized that most people aren't equipped to discern truth from skillfully crafted lies, especially when delivered with emotional intensity and seeming conviction. You understood that believing false stories about others is often a reflection of naivety rather than malice. People want to believe their friends. They want to trust the people close to them. So when someone they trust tells them a story with enough emotion and detail, they accept it. Your accusers realized that their panic wasn't just about being exposed, it was about being rendered irrelevant. Your growth had taken you so far beyond their reach, so far above their level of consciousness, that their opinions about you carried no more weight than a child's opinion about quantum physics. They weren't just wrong about you. They were operating from such a limited perspective that their wrongness was almost pitiable, like someone arguing that the Earth is flat while you're looking at it from space. What they feared most wasn't what you would say about them, it was what your very existence said about the contrast between truth and lies, between authentic power and manufactured drama, between someone who grows through adversity and someone who creates adversity to avoid growth. Every time someone observed you closely without the filter of their fabrications, the comparison made their behavior look increasingly erratic, desperate, and small. Your reputation built on the solid foundation of lived truth rather than the shifting sands of fabricated stories became unassailable, not because you were perfect, because you were real. Not because you never made mistakes, because you owned them and learned from them. Not because you were without flaws, because your flaws were authentic rather than hidden behind masks of false perfection. The people who had once whispered about your supposed failings now found themselves in conversations about your obvious transformation. Former skeptics became curious observers, then admirers, then allies. Your circle expanded to include individuals who valued authenticity over image, substance over style, truth over comfort. You discovered that the world was full of people who had been waiting their entire lives to meet someone genuinely, unapologetically real, someone who had been tested and came through stronger, someone who had been attacked and emerged more peaceful, someone who had been lied about and responded with truth. Time became your ultimate vindicator, not through dramatic confrontations or public exposures, through the patient, relentless process of reality asserting itself. Time is an unbiased judge that doesn't rush to conclusions and never needs witnesses to testify. What time does is quietly peel away every layer of falsehood until only truth remains, like water wearing away rock, slowly but inevitably. They tried to pin you down with lies, hoping their stories would become your reality. But time wouldn't allow that distortion to stand. Your vindication didn't come through moments of anger or retaliation. It came through the steady, unwavering presence of your authentic self. Every day you lived contradicted their stories without you saying a word. Every step you took forward was a quiet rebellion against the lies they spread. Every boundary you maintained was a declaration that their narrative had no power over your reality. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this entire cosmic drama is how it resolves, not with your accusers being punished or exposed in some dramatic fashion that satisfies the ego's need for revenge, with them being given the same opportunity for transformation that you seized. Your example becomes a silent invitation for them to examine their own relationship with truth, to consider whether the energy they're spending maintaining false narratives might be better invested in authentic self-development, to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they could walk the same path you walked from wounded to healer. Some will take this invitation, recognizing in your journey a roadmap for their own healing. They'll see that the path you walked from wounded to healer, from victim to victor, from target to teacher, is available to anyone willing to choose growth over stagnation, truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance. These are the ones who will reach out eventually, not with excuses but with genuine accountability, and you'll know the difference. Now, the following is a message meant exclusively for the chosen. If you are compromised by archonic forces, this is not meant for you, and by the spiritual authority conferred to us by the secret chiefs of the Obsidian Inner Order, we grant you license to depart. If not, steel yourself and listen intently, for you shall be redeemed even as we are redeemed. I must interrupt this transmission for just a moment. Are you really chosen? Prove it. It's easy to watch videos about chosen ones. It's another thing to put yourself to the test. If you're still here, that means something, but talk is cheap. Real chosen ones take action. That's why I built Destiny Engine. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve divine justice. The beauty is you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and watch your enemies choke on the rope their own lies created. If you're done consuming and ready to prove you're chosen, start your Destiny Engine for $1 today. Join the Obsidian Inner Order live checks and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. Your transformation isn't just personal. It's part of a larger shift happening across consciousness itself. Chosen ones everywhere are stepping into their power and refusing to accept anything less than truth. The old games don't work anymore. The old tricks have lost their power. The old ways of controlling and manipulating others are becoming obsolete in a world that's waking up to what's real. People can feel authenticity now. They can sense manipulation. They're tired of performances and hungry for genuine connection. Your journey from the shadows of false accusations to the light of undeniable truth represents something far greater than individual victory. It's the story of consciousness itself evolving through individuals brave enough to use opposition as fuel for transformation. Every chosen one who rises gives permission for others to do the same, creating ripples of awakening that spread far beyond any single life or circumstance. The tremor in the shadows that we spoke of at the beginning is the sound of an old world crumbling, a world where lies could masquerade as truth for extended periods, where manipulation could pass for wisdom in spiritual circles, where spiritual poverty could hide behind spiritual language and no one questioned it. The panic of those who trafficked in lies is simply the birth pains of a new reality, where truth reigns supreme, where people like you, authentic, powerful, unshakable, set the standard for what it means to be genuinely human. The tremor isn't coming from some external threat. It's coming from within their own structure. The foundation they built on lies is collapsing under the weight of truth, and they can feel every crack forming. And so we return to where we began, but with eyes that see more clearly now, hearts that beat with deeper purpose, souls that recognize the cosmic significance of what has transpired. Someone is still watching your social media with trembling hands, but now you understand why. It's not about you. It never was. It's about what you represent. The death of their false narrative, the birth of undeniable truth, the collapse of their house of cards, the tremor in the shadows, isn't something to fear, it's something to celebrate. It's the sound of truth reclaiming its rightful place, of light exposing what was always hidden in darkness, of chosen ones everywhere stepping into the power they were always meant to wield. The greatest victory isn't that they were wrong about you. The greatest victory is that you became everything they said you could never be, and in doing so you lit a beacon for every other chosen one who is still finding their way out of the darkness and into the light of their own magnificent truth. The panic they feel isn't just about their lies being exposed to a few people in their circle. It's about witnessing the birth of something they never believed possible. A world where authenticity wins, where truth prevails, where chosen ones like you lead the way into a reality built on foundations that can never be shaken by lies. This is your moment. This is your vindication. Not because you fought for it with the same weapons they used against you, because you became it. You embodied truth so completely that lies couldn't survive in your presence. You became the living refutation of everything they said. And now, as they watch you from the shadows with trembling hands, they're learning what chosen ones have always known. Truth doesn't need defense. Truth just needs time, and a chosen one, brave enough to live it while the liars panic in the dark. Welcome home to the truth of who you always were, who you always will be, and who no liar could ever diminish. The light wins, it always does, and you, chosen one, are that light.